Of course. Good evening, everybody, and hello to those who are in Council Chamber and also who are joining us online. My name's Councillor Davey, and I'm the Vice Chair of this committee, and I'd like to welcome you all to the City Council Civic Affairs Committee meeting, which is taking place today at 5:30 p.m. on the 16th of May 2022. Other members of the committee are Councillors Bick, Dryden, Flaubert and Gawthropwood. Apologies have been received from the Council's independent person, Rob Bennett. Officers will be joining us throughout the course of the meeting, and I will introduce them at the start of the relevant agenda items. I know we've probably all got used to it, but in terms of housekeeping, it's worth repeating. Copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website under committee meetings, minutes and agendas. Please try and refer to page and paragraph numbers within the agenda. Please ensure that you have switched off or silenced any other devices you may have so that they will not interrupt proceedings. And when you are invited to address the meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. When you finish addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately and speak slowly and clearly, and please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. Please can those present in the council chamber know that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, may be broadcast at some point. And the camera follows the microphone being switched on, so councillors and officers are requested to wait a couple of seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. And please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Please can those participating in the meeting via the Teams meeting indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column or raised hand option, and I will try and pick that up with Gary's assistance. Please do not use the chat column for any other purpose. The meeting chat is neither confidential nor private and can be subject to an FOI or a GDPR request. If you can make sure that your device is fully charged and that you switch your microphone off unless you're invited to speak. And please can meeting participants keep their microphone and cameras turned off until we come to their relevant agenda item. Right, so if we can move on now to the items on the agenda. In terms of formally, Gary, do we need to identify any apologies from today's meeting?
No, Chair, there's no apologies today.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, please could councillors declare if they have any declarations of interest and identify which agenda item their declaration relates to. I assume that also includes people virtually or not?
Just members of the committee.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Okay, no declarations. If we move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting of the 2nd of February, and they've been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise them now, otherwise they should be approved as a correct record. So if I just check. Any concerns that people wish to express relating to the minutes of the 2nd of February? Take that as consent. And they will be approved as a correct record. We now move on to agenda item 4, which is related to public questions. We have no registered speakers. I'm not sure if anybody can come late, but we don't appear to have any registered speakers. So unless I hear anything to the contrary, I shall move on to 5. And there are 3 officer delegated decisions to be noted at the meeting. Now, I think, is Deborah there? Yes. Does Deborah wish to say anything about those 3 meetings? 3 items, sorry. Deborah, hello. Good evening.
Good evening. Only to say that they relate to the implementation of national pay awards, which were agreed for 2020-21. There was notification to all councillors by email before the decisions were actioned. They were all actioned in March pay awards.
Thank you. Any questions at all relating to those decisions? In which case, Deborah, thank you very much. I think we now go to, it's quite simply just we now implement those 3. Note. Yeah. Any other questions? In which case, Deborah, thank you, and thank you for joining us. I'll be in briefly for today's meeting. Thank you very much. If we now turn to agenda item 6, which is the internal audit plan for 2022-23. Jonathan, you're in the meeting now. Welcome. And I wonder if you want to introduce this item.
Thank you ever so much, Chairman. Much appreciated. Good evening to everyone. It is a long report. What I will do is I'll just try and draw out some highlights from the report for you all. So starting on page 31 of your committee agenda packs. And I suppose briefly, in summary, the purpose of this report is really to report 3 things from me. One is to give an indication of the next 6 months worth of work that we're going to be doing in the team and communicate that to the committee. Secondly, provide you with feedback from work that we've undertaken from the last 6 months. And also, finally, based on that work, give you our current opinion on the control environment at the council. So the report recommendations on page 31, paragraph 2, is really just to approve the plan and our supporting charter and code of ethics. There's been no significant change to the charter or code of ethics, but we do like to bring these back to the committee at least annually, because it helps demonstrate how we comply with public sector internal audit standards. So that's a really good thing to have recorded. So just by way of a quick background, on page 32, in paragraph 3.6, it's worth noting that the Civic Affairs Committee approved that we have a 6-month plan. That's something we did at the beginning of the pandemic. It was important to help us to be agile and respond to lots of demands that were going on. And I think it continues to be very relevant, which is why we're still working with a 6-month plan. This approach really has been recommended by professional bodies, and a lot of councils are now doing it. So we last reported to the committee back in September. Appendix B, which I just provide reference to on page 32 as well, it's just introducing our update to the committee on work undertaken over the past 6 months. I think important point to note is that we focused a lot of resources still on supporting the business grants process. It continued to be a high priority for the council. That said, you can see that we've still managed to deliver a number of audits, which is really great positive reflection on the team. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the document itself. So first of all, the internal audit plan. I wanted to draw your attention to on page 36, section 3. This talks about how we identify work to include in the plan. So it helps provide you as members with a little bit of background knowledge. And logically, we progress on to section 4, which is about resources. And I think we need to recognise there's always more demand for audits than resources. So what we do is we prioritise our work according to risk and need at the council. That makes sure we're adding the most value. Moving on to pages 38 and 39 in section 5. This provides a little bit more information about how we sort of categorise that work. And the key things to communicate here is how we classify our reviews by assurance type. So is it a core piece of assurance work that we do? This is something that's pretty much mandatory you have to do, whether it's something that's risk-based, something that's really important to look at, or even if we take assurance from a third party. We also introduce the concept of themes in our plans each year. Now, the key themes are for us are transformation, resilience and recovery, making sure we've got good governance, and also counter-fraud work. The counter-fraud work reflects a lot of stuff to do with business grants. I think that is starting to decrease now compared to what we've been doing over the last 12 months, but there's still very much an element there. On page 39, also in section 6, there's a paragraph about follow-up reviews. And if it's okay, Chairman, I have a question from our independent member, which I'll come back to at the end to discuss. So moving on to page 41, so section 9. This provides you with an indication about how our resources are split across different areas and different activity types. The key message here is that it's broadly the same as last year, not much changed there. We still continue to have a high amount of resources being delivered towards consultancy work as well as audit and assurance work. So, but that's good. It's reflecting the needs of the council. So delving into the potential work itself on page 42, our audits here, which we'd like to look at in the next 6 months, we break them into 2 different categories. Corporate plan objectives. This is our risk-based appraisal, what we would like to look at over the next 6 months. And we've already made a start on these in some areas. And then we move on to page 43. You'll see a table there. It's classified as core assurance work. Simplest way to describe this is work that we have to do. In some cases, it may be mandatory. It may be providing grant certification after we've had the money and giving assurance back to third parties, or it may be something of such significance. It's something that we review every year. Page 45 and 46. So this is sections 9.4 and 9.5. We have to follow public sector internal audit standards. This is our sort of our measure of good practice. And that requires us to note other activities which contribute to improving the governance, risk and control environments. So we provide some explanation about what that type of work is in those sections. So these are not your classic audits, but they are things which do help overall. And good examples there are where we do follow-up reviews and also where we've got involved in things like business grants. So that's sort of the plan for the next 6 months. Appendix B, the next document, is our progress updates. The key bits I'd like to highlight in that. On page 48 in section 3, this is our audit opinion. I like to provide the committee with regular updates. At the moment, I feel we have overall level of reasonable assurance, which is good. That's the same level as the previous reports. As ever, we recognise specifically at the moment, these are challenging times for the council, but we have the same level of assurance as previously. So that's a good reflection indeed. On page 50, we summarise some of our progress against the plan over the past sort of 6 months. The key things I'd talk about here, risk management strategy. It's worth talking about that because that's very important to our governance arrangements. The output of that was also reported to this committee previously, but we continue to make good progress on that. Fuel cards, I'd just like to highlight because that is one which is a limited assurance report. In some ways, it's not surprising. It was a new system and it was our first review of the system. So perhaps not surprising that we identify some opportunities for improvement there. Overall, there's good contract, but as you can imagine, there's lots of transactions, lots of data, so scope for risk. And while our sample testing didn't highlight specific transactions, we've identified controls to implement which will help mitigate any risks happening. So we have a follow-up review planned of that, and we're already doing some work in that area at the moment. And then I'd also like to just highlight 2 reviews, carbon management and disabled facility grants, just because both of those, the assurance level increased from reasonable to full assurance. Moving on to page 53, I'd like to highlight the work that we do on the National Fraud Initiative. We extract data from systems, as do all other councils, and we submit it to the Cabinet Office for data matching. And we had to do data extracts in the last 6 months, so we did that on time. And we've got results back now, which we're working through. No significant concerns raised as yet, but every time we manage to close off a transaction, that is some positive assurance that controls are working effectively. So well worth doing. Business grants in section 8. A lot of resource has continued to be spent in this area to help improve risk and control. And it's been a positive experience for us working with other members of the grant team. Fortunately, we've come towards the end of that process now because the final grants have been issued. But that said, there's still lots of work that we're doing as a team involved in the reconciliation process and providing assurance back to central government that controls were effective. So we're working with those teams on that. And then on page, what's the page there? But section 8, it's the public sector internal audit standards. I'd like to make reference that we continue to maintain compliance with the standards. That's important, and we diarise regular reviews for that.
Page 54 is, Jonathan. Page 54.
Thank you very much. I couldn't see that on my screen. too tiny. Thank you. And then just really the next two parts, well, three parts of the report. We've got Appendix C, which is our charter. This is about setting out our right of access to information, very important. Appendix D is our code of ethics. We obviously have good standards which we have to follow, and we make sure we regularly comply with that. And then Appendix E, because we have so many professional terms in internal audit, I like to just include a glossary of terms for you to help sort of digest and break down some of the words we use into plain English. And those documents haven't really changed since the last time I brought them to the committee. So I'm happy that's me talking through the report. I'm happy to take sort of comments and questions, but if I can start off just by addressing the question from Rob Bennett, I'll if that's okay with you, Chairman.
It is indeed. Yes, John.
Thanks. So Rob mentioned, he said he's had a read through of the plan and that it's a helpful summary of planned work and results so far. But he wanted to note the importance of following up the implementation of previous recommendations and highlighted that although it's recognised in the report, it's probably worth drawing attention to that as a committee. So I suppose what I would comment in response for Rob there, and I hope the rest of the committee finds it useful. We include resources in our plan each year for follow-up work. The amount of resources we allocate will vary from year to year. It's going to be driven by the audits that we've done previously, but it really is important that we allocate an amount of resource for that. Our standard approach is that we follow up the status of all high-level actions. So these are the important ones. They'll typically be contained in limited or no assurance reports. And in that instance, what we tend to do is actually do another audit. We'll do a complete follow-up audit. Other actions which are a low or medium level, we don't tend to do a full audit on those, just because our time can be more sort of valuable looking at other areas. Management are entrusted to sort of deliver those actions, but what we will do is we'll make sure they're actually being followed up. But it won't be a full audit. We record all our actions on a system, so this allows us to do that monitoring. We link the actions back to risks, which is really positive. And if there were no risks at the time which are relevant, that's often a great prompt to improve our risk register, and we will add a new relevant risk to the system at the time. So that whole process allows us to stay on top of them to a level which I think is appropriate. So that was my feedback for Rob. I'm happy for any further comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, open to councillors. Councillor Dryden.
Thank you. On page 39, counter fraud, just query there. I understand South Cams have identified fraud there and actually been to court with prosecutions now. Has the City Council made any?
No, we haven't. As some members may be aware, actually, we're a shared service with South Cams. And the case which we had at South Cams hasn't happened at Cambridge City. It could have done. This was to do with business grants, and we did a lot of proactive work to try and detect as much of this as possible. But yeah, the same risk hasn't materialised at Cambridge City.
Councillor Bick.
Thanks, Chair. I read with interest about the way you identify I'm not sure what you call them, assignments or projects that are going to be pursued, and you fit those as far as you can to the resource available. And I guess what we're looking at is the result of that process in the which section is that? That's Appendix A. What I guess would be of potential interest is to understand what fell out outside that cut in order to make a decent comment and scrutinise to see as elected members what didn't make the cut but was considered still a candidate for a review or a project. I just wondered whether you could tell us anything about that, please.
Sure. No, it is a great question. What the approach we take is that we compile a big database, if you like, called an audit universe. It sounds very grand. And what we do is we capture all our potential reviews in that system. And what we're looking at there is potentially a body of work which could take anywhere between 3 and 5 years to deliver, to actually cover off the whole sort of risk environment of the council, because we do so many varied activities. And what will happen within that universe is that I will undertake a risk-based appraisal. I'll consult with different stakeholders throughout the process, and we do this continually now to identify what I feel are the high levels of important risks. And it's that top level based on our resources which fall into the plan. And there will be some which just didn't make the plan but are likely to be picked up within the next 6 months. And there'll be some which are of such low materiality that will be looked at maybe once every 5 years. What I would say, because we've moved to the 6-month plan, this is to really reflect how dynamic the plan is and how changing it is. And this is really something that's happened more and more, I think, over the last couple of years. And it's good. We shouldn't be tied down to commitments which are no longer topical or relevant. So I think the things which won't meet the cut, which will sort of like be picked up within the next following 6 months. I mean, some of the things on my radar, if I can have a look back at some of my records, because I don't have it in the document here in front of me. I think there's probably going to be responding to emerging legislation. So as part of the Queen's speech, we saw legislation emerging and we'll want to respond to that, do some sort of preparedness reviews. How ready is the council? And that could be around areas such as the protect duty. I think one thing we'd also expect to be looking at is more and more is around linked to protect duty, perhaps around premise security, recognizing that we're working differently as a council now in a bit more of an agile way. So it would be good and useful to look at that and how we're using our premises and making sure that's all safe. It's quite possible that we will bring in some more discrete bits of environmental work. We're already doing work planned on sort of carbon management in terms of data quality, but we might like to delve a little bit deeper into that. I'm alert to any further things which could happen from central government, and whether there's any more support packages coming out there in terms of helping the people with the cost of living crisis. We may have an ask to help support teams in delivery of that process, or providing assurance back to central governments around that. So that might be in addition to what's happening at the moment. The other thing that probably would be on my mind would be whether it'd be good to look at the things like the customer portal and how that system interacts. I want to bring in lots of work. As you can see, transformation was a key topic in one of my themes. So anything that we can help with that would be useful. And I think there'll probably be lots of little projects materializing where we'll get involved in proactive assurance over the next 6 to 12 months, although we wouldn't know specifically what those are at this point in time. I hope that is useful.
Can I pick up something there, which follows on from Councillor Bick's and your question, and also your response, Jonathan? You mentioned transformation, and ironically, that was the question I was going to ask. Are there any particular areas within the transformation programme that you would be particularly interested to look at over the course of the next 12 months? Or is it too early at this stage? The trouble is, transformation is so all-encompassing, I mean, it could take you anywhere. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts.
No, absolutely. I think, discussions I've had with a few people already is we can approach this from a few different perspectives. We can look at the transformation as a project as a whole. That's a very big ask, but it can be helpful to provide a sort of interim health check about how things are working. But I think where we can add some real value is by getting involved in some of the projects. Now, realistically, we're not going to have resource to be involved in every project that's happening. So it's going to have to be risk-based. And we don't know, you're quite right, we don't know what those are at this point, and we're working with the transformation team to sort of identify where we can be helpful. But what I would rather do as an audit team is get involved early on rather than come along at the end and say, I wish we'd done things differently. So that planning process will be very helpful. And I think probably what we're going to see is a more sort of detailed audit plan for the following 6 months after this one. I think it's fair to recognise we're still doing a little bit of that consultancy work. It's really great. We've got some audits done. We're starting to bring in more small targeted bits of audit work. So I think we'll see some of those hopefully be detailed in the next one, which comes back in 6 months.
Councillor Bick.
Yes, I wondered whether Jonathan thinks there is any scope or interest in looking on a thematic basis rather than a specific process basis at the big expansion of home working within the organisation, and whether there are some control-related issues, maybe not limited to that, that arise from kind of the vast majority of the organisation perhaps not sitting in an office environment any longer. One does read certain things about the implications which one would want to make sure weren't the case with our organisation, and I just wondered whether a thematic look at that would be something that might be on your radar screen.
It's a really good, interesting question. So it's something we can think about. It was something that was probably high on my radar as soon as we went into lockdown, and we all had to adapt quite quickly. We were lucky that we already had Council Anywhere infrastructure set up, so I think a lot of people adapted, and I think we saw it probably working quite well. So it probably dropped a little bit further down on my radar. Perhaps where we are now is that moving to a more sort of a blended hybrid approach. There might be some merits in doing some thematic based reviews. Yeah, it's potential for something to look at. So yeah, that's something I'm happy to take away and have a think about.
I've got a second question, if I might. It's in relation to page 44, and the middle box relates to an audit on ethics, culture and governance. I just wondered if you could expand a bit on that, because there is a degree of, I suppose, disenchantment, is that the right word, of the way that government works and how politicians operate. And I just wondered what the scope of that particular review will be, because I think it would be invaluable, I have to say, and we need to hold ourselves up for scrutiny. So I'd just be intrigued to know as to where that might be going, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I want to include as a sort of portion in our plan each year. It's again, it's one of these things that's far too big to take in one audit. So as part of our sort of planning process, we've got it sort of set down in the plan with your approval to actually develop a more sort of detailed focused brief. But it will be looking at a few key areas, and then probably what I'll do is come back and look at a few different areas the following 6 months and a couple more the following 6 months. So yeah, it's not into a detailed plan as yet, is the truthful answer. But what we want to do, and it's important, this is a role we have as well as doing a health check, we also have an opportunity to do a lot of promotion about good practice in the council. That's something that we're in a great position to do with my team when we go out and deliver these reviews. So we're already starting to build up some sort of training materials. We're starting to make sure we're upskilled very much in that area around ethics. And yeah, so we're helping to sort of like train people and educate people all the while we're delivering these reviews. I'm, being very honest, it's a very, very difficult sort of audit to grasp. And I know that a lot of my peers across both the public and private sector, thinking, you know, how's the best way to test this effectively. So that's something I'm going to be giving a bit of focus to over the next 6 months.
I think it would be welcome because, ironically, it could inform transformation and ensuring that we have the right ethics, governance and culture in place. But I understand, Jonathan. Well, before I close, is there any other questions people have for Jonathan? Looks like that's it, in which case we'll go back to the recommendations, if that's okay, and that's on page 31 of your pack. And the recommendations are under section 2. And I think unless people can tempt me to take them en bloc. Yeah, I don't see nothing. Okay. In which case, can I take recommendation 2? All those in favour, please raise your hand.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gary. And we thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you for attending the meeting.
Thank you.
Much appreciated for a very full and comprehensive outline. Much appreciated. Thank you. Right, Gary, should we move on to item 7? And Gary, I suspect you've been running around quite dramatically over the past 24, 48 hours to try and get this. So before we start, just my gratitude for all the work I know you've had to do during the last day or so. But can you now introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. Evening, everyone. This is an annual report that obviously follows the results of the elections that were held on the 5th of May. It also highlights for the Civic Affairs Committee any sort of constitutional issues that may be appropriate to address at this point in the municipal year. If I'd just like to take you through the recommendations one by one. When it comes to the committee sizes to recommend to council, and then obviously the nominations from the political groups on the council, some years we find ourselves at this point in the preparation that we're not quite ready to recommend the numbers, and that's where we are today. So I will be recommending that we will basically follow up with that in terms of recommendation of committee sizes to the council at some point between now and the annual meeting. I'm going to be talking to group leaders tomorrow morning in preparation for the council agenda. But don't be alarmed, this is something that sometimes happens, that we just need to dot the I's and cross the T's on that. And the chair, and I spoke to the leader of the council just before the start of the meeting. So an update paper will be published for recommendation to the council between now and then. Okay, so that's on little 1. We have got nominations for chairs and vice chairs, but if you don't mind, I'll include that in the updates that I send around. So the Labour group have given nominations for chairs and vice chairs for the committees. And again, that will be in the update paper. Little 3 talks about any constitutional updates required. So sometimes as a result of elections, there might be a change of control or something like that. So don't forget this paper was published the day we were doing the count. So we didn't obviously know what the outcome of the elections would be. So it's just a sort of a recommendation that's in there that enables us to put something before you if there is a need. I am aware that the leader of the council has been looking at the executive councillor portfolios, and there will be an update again for the council meeting of what those portfolios are and an explanation of where those portfolios will report to again ahead of the council meeting. But that's the only thing I just wanted to draw to your attention today. Little 4 talks about virtual area committees until further notice. So we think that the officer view is that the area committees acting virtually is working well. There is a report that members have seen, or a briefing that members have had from the Governance and Scrutiny National independent body on our decision making, which amongst other things makes a comment on how we're working in an area committee way at the moment and whether or not that's the way we should work in the longer term. So we think that if we carry on area committees virtually for the time being to enable members to look at the wider ways of working in terms of the meetings that you have, the decision-making meetings you have, and how you want to work with your local communities. So we save some money by meeting virtually. The numbers of people who are interacting with you at area committees has not changed dramatically by being online. Some people prefer it, obviously some people don't, but bearing in mind we're looking at probably saving about £5,000 in a full year. We thought that on balance carrying on virtually was okay with you. Little 5 has caused a bit of comment. So basically, when the pandemic happened and we all went online, obviously meetings had to be online. Decision-making meetings were online. This council, along with the other 2 councils as part of the 3C ICT shared service, went onto a system called Microsoft Live Stream, which is Teams Live, which was connected to what we're all used to working in a Microsoft Teams environment now. And those meetings only lasted on our systems for 6 months. So as a member of the public, after a meeting, you could go and watch the recording, but the recording would only be there on our system for 6 months. And that was a Microsoft issue. That wasn't a City Council chosen issue. So from May 2020 to May 2021, all our meetings were on, but they were only available for 6 months. Between May 2021 and December 21, we were meeting in various places, weren't we? We were meeting in the Corn Exchange, and then we came back here. And we were meeting, and this equipment we're now using was installed in September 2021. And by the time we got to January of this year, we started to stream our meetings onto the council's YouTube channel, which means we can keep those meetings on until we decide to remove them. Now, I've been looking at what our council's doing elsewhere. Some are not keeping them other than being able to watch them live. So some of them are not keeping them recordings of them at all. Some of them are thinking of 6 months. I'm suggesting 12 months. Some people have said to me that maybe we should keep them for a period of time longer than that. I think the jury is still out on how long you really need to keep city council meetings on a YouTube channel. 1, for information management. 2, for thinking about the people participating in those meetings. So when people participate in our meetings, we warn them that they're going to be broadcast live. I think we just need to see what's happening nationally, look at best practice guidance. I'm happy to say we can keep them on for longer than 12 months because I don't have a strong view. I just thought 12 months was longer than 6 months, but not in perpetuity. And I don't think it's sensible to keep recordings in perpetuity of city council meetings. As far as the law is concerned, the record of the meeting is the minutes. So, you know, this is a nice to have. And I accept that things have moved on greatly, you know, in the last 2 years compared to the last 20 years. Some of us will remember when they started to want to come to meetings, members of the public, and record meetings. And we were all a bit nervous about it back in the sort of 2010, 2011, 2012 period. And now we're all quite comfortable being watched by people who knows where, for how long, and that's the way of the world. But I think, you know, in terms of how long we keep these meetings on our YouTube channel, certainly when it comes to planning meetings, I think it's quite helpful because obviously that's what our residents are interested in primarily. Budget meetings, you know, but there is a thing about what do people watch, you know, in the now, and how many people realistically are going to be wanting to look, you know, 2 years in 2 years' time at something or whatever. So anyway, that's a bit of background to that fairly small recommendation. Like I say, you may choose to ignore it. And the last one is obviously this year we've decided to have 2 council meetings in consecutive Thursdays where you dedicated a whole meeting's time to debating the budget, and then all the other business was discussed the following Thursday. I don't know whether or not you might want to look at spreading that out a bit. So obviously the budget meeting is fixed and we have to have it, by late February. But whether or not we might come back to you in the autumn and decide, is there a better time in March to have the second meeting, or are there other configurations which we might find when you start looking at decision making with the chief exec and team? We might find ourselves in a different place anyway. So I think just putting a marker down there of you will be involved in that, as will your groups. So, Chair, that's a brief summary of where we are.
Thank you, Gary. Questions? Councillor Bick first.
Yes, a comment, perhaps more than entirely a question. Just going through the recommendations, the suggestion that we wait and see Gary's further analysis of what's been submitted by the groups, that sounds sensible to me. In relation to, I'm not sure whether it's little 1 or little 3, I just wanted to raise something a little bit outside that, which was that it occurred to me that whereas I think we took a decision a couple of years ago to enable alternates, more than one alternate, on scrutiny committees, which as far as I'm concerned seems to be an arrangement that has helped and has worked well. We don't actually, and we didn't take a decision to do that in relation to any other committees. And I'm thinking particularly of the planning committee and the intensity of the obligation that people enter into as a member of that committee, and a lot of time involved, and a lot of people hanging on what it does, that it might make for better predictability and attendance of a decent number of members of the committee if there was the possibility on that committee as well of enabling 2 alternates for the groups. And it's not something particularly for one group or another that I'm suggesting this. I just feel that we need to mount a decent attendance for planning committees, and that would help to make sure we do. Obviously, the alternates would have to be trained the same as members of the committee itself. And I just wonder whether it's possible for this committee to kind of adopt that idea and enable that to happen if it agreed. The question in little 5 about the retention of the recordings, I think that that maybe we need to pause a little bit more before taking that decision. I think there are kind of many, as Gary covered many of the facets of this, but I think it would be good to sort of sit down with a little bit of reflection around all of those to decide what is the best thing. And my instinctive reaction was that although written minutes are still the legal record of meetings, in practice, people are increasingly regarding the recordings as a record of the meeting that is of some importance, and kind of chopping them off after a year kind of stops that being the case. And if we want, that we could just be running away from a tide there, and I'm not sure that's a sensible thing to do until at least we've thought about it with a bit more depth. And on recommendation little 6, I'm very open-minded to what's being envisaged here, both maintaining the kind of division that we arrived at, but also possibly, and maybe pros and cons, but widening the separation between those two. But I do think especially if we widened the separation of those 2 meetings, then we might need to stop regarding them as a single meeting, technically speaking, so that all the deadlines in relation to the second meeting were actually timed in relation to the first, which means that I think that for the purposes of people asking questions, putting motions down and so on, it would almost be an unreasonable time ahead of them actually getting entertained in the public before that happens. So probably would need to consider also whether we made that two separate meetings with two separate sets of deadlines to make that kind of more reasonable.
Can I just check, Gary, do you want to respond in any way? I mean, if I'm allowed to comment, I think, just before I bring other councillors in, the fifth little point 6 about the budget, I wonder if that will be covered in the CFGS and the review of the BSR process that's currently underway. But I would support what Councillor Bick says, and that we could probably wait until the autumn to see. By that stage, those reports will have come back before council. And so therefore, it would seem wise to hear what, if you like, if you employ consultants, it's always wise to listen to what they say before deciding. So I would suggest, if people are content, that's exactly what we do, as Councillor Bick suggested. We'll perhaps pick up some of your other points later on, Councillor Bick. So Councillor Dryden next.
About not being able to make decisions. Is it possible then them decisions we're supposed to make area committees, we could bring back to the relevant committees, where the members of them committees could make decisions then, and you'd probably save him more money. It just seems a bit, I've got concerns that it's been taken by officers just by talking to the committee. And just a comment then, perhaps the budget meeting we're going to have, a separate budget meeting, is it possible to look at that happening in the daytime?
Yeah, Councillor Dryden, if we pick some of these comments up at the end, if that's okay. Next up, now I think Councillor Bennett had her hand up virtually, and I understand, although not a member of the committee, I have the ability to enable her to speak. So if people are content, Councillor Bennett.
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to say two particular points. The first is on keeping a record of the meetings. Presumably, even if the council does take down recording after a year, it would be possible to retain those recordings in the cloud, so that they could be accessed if really needed. I'm sorry, I'm not really sure whether you can hear me at all well.
Councillor Bennett, we can hear you loud and clear.
Great. It's just that when I hear it myself, I'm breaking up.
Oh, you're very clear. Do you want to go on to your second point, Councillor Bennett?
Yes, please, Chair. The second point was on the use of multiple alternates for committees, particularly the planning committees. I think that there are positive equality implications from allowing multiple alternates. I'm sure I don't need to go through the details. But there's also negative cost implications if we have to train further alternates. And I was wondering how large the negative cost implications are.
Just clarify, Councillor Bennett, you're asking about the cost implications of having alternates for planning in addition to other committees. Okay, thank you.
Another query on keeping recordings. Now, presumably, the written record has a finite life of probably 100 years or something. I don't want to get into the workings of how the IT system works, but I wonder whether or not you'd had much feedback from or letters from the public about this, and is this something that the transformation team project programme could address?
Thank you, Jenny. Shall we just open this up then and see if there's any further comments on the recordings first? If we take that item first, because that seems to be... Can I just check, Are there cost or capacity implications for doing it for longer or holding on to the recordings for longer than 12 months?
No, there are no cost implications that I'm aware of. This is purely just looking at how we sort of manage our meetings and like I say, looking at how democracy works, sometimes things take a long time to evolve. And the people out there are all asking the same sort of questions because we're all now streaming, or people are investing in streaming kit. So I think we've done well to invest significant sum of money in the last couple of years, and reaping the benefits of that. Some members have wanted us to broadcast planning committee, for example, for some years, and it is useful to observers, members of the public, business people who can interact without having necessarily to come to central Cambridge. So there's lots of benefits there, but there's no costs, Chair. What I don't know, and I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about this, is how much stuff we're putting in the cloud. And, at some point we need to think about, what we archive, as Councillor Bennett has suggested, and I just need to talk to IT and also information governance. So I think the points you've all raised are all valid, and I think I've just started a conversation and happy to go away and come back with some proposals as we find out more.
That would be very helpful. Just, I suppose, behind the scenes, just for Councillor Bick's information, both the leader and myself raised the same points, I think, with Gary about the length of time, about how we hold on to, how long we hold on to recordings. And I think both Councillor Bennett and Councillor Gawthrop's suggestions, I think, make sense. So I suppose the question is, Gary, if we agree to pause on making that decision, what's the process there afterwards? Does it come back to this committee at a later date?
Yes. Yeah, I would make sure I'd come back. We wouldn't just do something without reference back to members. So okay. We would, at some point, look at all the issues you've raised and come back with proposals as we learn more. And Councillor Gawthrop, you did ask about feedback. It's only anecdotal that when we're in an area committee or in a virtual meeting, you either get the thank yous or you get them afterwards. It's been helpful to people who make contributions, to feel as though they are part of the meeting, even though they're not necessarily physically here.
So in which case, if people are, unless I hear any violent objections to this, then a report back to the next meeting of this committee.
Or a future meeting.
And to a future meeting regarding, but in the meantime, please keep the recordings up. I think, again, as Councillor Bick indicated, people are using these as a record, even if they're not a formal record, if that makes sense. So going backwards over the processes, we pick up Councillor Dryden's point about when the budget meetings are held and if they could be held in the day. Again, just in terms of structure, if we're going to get a report from the BSR review and the CFGS, we would anticipate that those proposals would come at that stage. Is that okay, Rob? Sorry, Councillor Dryden, is that okay? In which case, we'll take that then. In terms of the virtual area committees at this stage, again, I think I call it by the jargon, forgive me, CFGS are making proposals about area committees. In the meantime, presumably we can just keep them as virtual until we see their proposals. And the proposals we're coming through, do you know?
We're going to start doing the work with members imminently.
So we'll find out about area committees.
When you make these decisions and stuff goes to, when we can vote there and then, when we're in present, we listen to people, can talk, and we can make a decision there and then. But this way, we don't listen to enough members of the public to make a decision. Because sometimes they come and tell us things at meetings when we make a decision. But the decision's been made before it goes to committee, isn't it? And it's an officer that's making a decision only of what they've heard from members. There's no vote on it, I'm saying. I've been at area committees where different councils have had a vote because they rather so much goes to one area or to another area, to a project. And it just seems that it's not enough democracy with your funding to go where we want it.
So if it helps, area committees were doing not as much decision making as they did when you recall, like, for example, environmental improvements and things like that. Obviously, before the pandemic, things were different, and some decisions have been taken with consultation with ward councillors, or officers have done things. I get that. The only thing that area committees were deciding by the time we started to talk to members about going virtual from last summer was area committee grants, which happened in the March cycle of area committees. And what's happened at those meetings is area committees have discussed the grant applications that are before them and have given a steer, shall we say. So the officer has made the decision after the meeting on those grants, but has been very mindful of the steer that has been given in the area committee meeting. And that's the same, to be fair, to on the neighbourhood policing priorities, where you get the police sitting and listening to members' discussion on the last 6 months and what the issues are for members at the time. And those police then go away and they will be mindful of what members have said, but likewise they will sometimes make their priorities depending on not just city councillors, as it were.
If I understand Councillor Dryden's point, it's about a democratic deficit, isn't it? It's about the fact that Councillor Dryden's fear is that officers are making decisions when they should be going to members. Would that be about right, Councillor Dryden?
That's correct, Chair. And also, you mentioned, Gary, about the police with their meetings as well. But I mean, I remember before we had area committees, the police had to have their own meetings, and really they're using our area committees to save themselves money. We should share some of the costs with the police with our meetings.
I think that the answer is probably to wait to receive the report for the CFGS report, which, as I say, is like, as Gary's indicated, will be coming before us imminently, and that's probably, presumably it'll come to this committee as well, must it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, thank you very much. Going backwards then over the if I can just stick to the recommendations. 1 and 2 we can't deal with at the moment.
Correct.
But if I could just pick up Councillor Bick's point about number 1, in the discussions that you have with Councillor Bennett, Councillor Bick and Councillor Smith, can you look at alternatives to planning?
Yeah.
I think, bearing in mind the workload on the planning committee members, the length of time involved in planning committee meetings, which is considerable, I have to say it seems like a wise suggestion to me. So if that could be taken up between yourself and the 3 leaders, that'd be fantastic. So we'll leave. And number 3, any constitutional updates required are set out in section 3.6. No. Sorry. So in essence, is there anything here we're actually deciding upon?
You have to agree that we're carrying on virtually with area committees until further notice.
Okay, so it's just that item.
It's just that item.
And in reality, that could be for a very short period of time. So if I can take it, therefore, that's the thing we're going to vote on. Rob?
That is the only concern I've got. What is there a time date on it? Because we'd like to know it's going to be another year. I mean, we went to this because of COVID, but now COVID's actually going out. That's not a reason to keep having these virtual meetings anymore.
I'm sorry, councillors. I think it's all part of the conversation we're going to be having on the wider debate about from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny and the suggestions for the scrutiny of the budget. It's all interlinked, and so I can't say the timescale, but I think the chief executive's on the call. We hear what you're saying, and we need to move forward on new ways of working. It's all part of the transformation.
I'm going to vote for it for the main reason it's saving the council money.
Thank you, Councillor Trident. That's helpful. Okay, in which case, shall we, sorry, I mustn't be too swift. Is there any other questions or comments on the report as we have received it? In which case, can we go to the vote on what is actually recommendation 2.4? Everybody, sorry, those in favour of recommendation 2.4, could they please raise their hand?
That's unanimous, thank you.
In which case, thank you very much. And that, I think, concludes the meeting. Would that be fair, Gary? Unless it's, okay, in which case, can I thank you all very much for attending, be it in person or virtually. Thank you. And thank you very much, Gary. And good luck in the next couple of days with your negotiations. Thanks very much.